Hi guys, settle into your blankets. Let the world outside your window fade into the background. Let the hum of the modern age, the flickering lights, the distant traffic, the constant digital buzz dissolve into a quiet, rhythmic pulse. We are going back, not just years, not just centuries, but back to the very dawn of memory. To a time when the stars were the only lanterns and the earth was still cooling from the fires of its birth. Tonight, we speak of the Anunnaki. The word itself carries a weight, doesn't it? Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. In the circles of modern fringe history and ancient astronaut theory, they are a source of endless debate. Some see them as flesh and blood, extraterrestrials, visitors from a hidden planet named Nibiru, who genetically engineered humanity to serve as workers. Others, the scholars and archaeologists, see them as the pantheon of the ancient Sumerians, the first great civilization of Mesopotamia. But regardless of what you believe, the fascination remains. We are drawn to them because their story feels like a half-remembered dream. It speaks of a time when the veil between the divine and the mortal was thin, and when the gods walked among us, leaving their fingerprints on the very clay of our existence. Close your eyes and imagine the universe before there was light. There was no sun to mark the passage of ours, no moon to pull the tides. There was only the Absutha, sweet, freshwater, ocean and Tiamat, the saltwater chaos, the great dragon of the deep. They were two primordial forces, swirling together in a dance that lasted for eons. There were no names yet. No destinies had been decreed. There was only the silence of the cosmic womb. In the Sumerian mind, the universe began with this union. From the mingling of the fresh and salt waters, the first gods were born. They were the ripples in the stillness. First came Lamu and Lahamu, the silt and the sediment, the first solids to emerge from the fluid void. Then came Ansha and Kisha, the horizons of heaven and earth. And finally, there was An, the Sky Father, whose presence was as vast and unchanging as the obsidian dome of the night sky. As the gods multiplied, the silence was broken. They moved, they spoke, they vibrated with a life that the elder Tiamat could not comprehend. This was the birth of motion, the birth of time. And among these young, vibrant entities, the Anunnaki began to take shape. They were the princely offspring, the great assembly of deities who would eventually govern the cosmos. But in those earliest days, they were merely sparks in a dark room, waiting for a stage upon which to play their parts in the ancient tablets, carved with the rhythmic wedges of cuneiform. We are told that in the beginning, heaven and earth were one. They were locked in a cosmic embrace so tight that there was no room for anything to grow. An, the sky, lay upon Ki, the earth. It was their son, and the Lord of the air and the breath of the world, who performed the first great act of creation. Imagine the strength it took to push the sky away from the ground. With a heave that shattered the primordial stillness, Enlil separated his parents. He lifted the heavy star-studded belly of his father high into the heights, and he pinned the body of his mother down into the foundations of the world. In the space between them, the atmosphere, the air we breathe, life finally found its room. This was the first time, the Zep Tepi of the soul. The Anunnaki descended. They did not come as kings, but as architects. They looked upon the raw, unfinished earther landscape of jagged mountains and shifting marshes, and they began to organize the chaos. The story tells us that the Anunnaki were divided. There were those who stayed in the heavens, the Agigi, who watched from the stars, and there were those who descended to the earth to do the heavy work. For you see, in the beginning, the gods had to work for their living. There were no humans to till the soil, no servants to dig the irrigation canals that would bring the life-giving waters of the Tigris and Euphrates to the thirsty land. The Anunnaki took up the spade and the basket. They labored under a sun that was younger and fiercer than the one we know today. They dug the beds of the great rivers, piling the earth into mountains. They planted the first orchards and laid the foundations for the first cities: Eridu, the city of the first descent, and Nibiru, the seat of Enlil. Can you hear the sound of their tools? The rhythmic thud of celestial bronze against primordial stone. For thousands of years they toiled. The tablets tell us that the work was immense. The gods grew weary. Their backs ached. Their hands became calloused. They were the masters of the universe, yet they were slaves to the necessity of their own creation. As the centuries stretched into millennia, a shadow of resentment began to grow. The Agigi, the lesser gods who bore the brunt of the manual labor, began to whisper in the darkness of their barracks. Why should they, the immortal ones, suffer the drudgery of the earth? Why should they sweat and bleed for a world that seemed never-ending in its demands? One night, the whispers turned to action. The Agigi set fire to their tools. They gathered in a great, shimmering mass and marched toward the temple of Enlil. They surrounded his gates in the pre-dawn light, their torches casting long, flickering shadows against the high walls of Nibiru. The stern lord of the air was awakened by the commotion. He was a god of order, a god who did not tolerate chaos. He called for his father An and his brother Enki, the clever lord of the deep waters. What is this? Enlil demanded, his voice like the roar of a storm. Who is the instigator of this strife? The Agigi cried out with one voice, the toil is too great. Our labor is heavy, our misery is much. Every one of us has declared war. The great gods sat in council. The air was thick with tension. Enlil wanted to punish the rebels, to strike them down with bolts of lightning and return them to the dust. But Enki, the lord of wisdom, the one whose home was the Abzuth, subterranean ocean of fresh water, looked upon the weary Agigi with compassion. He saw that their complaint was just Enki was the craftsman of the gods, a master of biology and me, the divine blueprints of reality. He leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the shimmering depths of his watery realm, and spoke a word that would change the course of history forever. There is a way, Enki whispered. Let us create a substitute, a creature that can bear the yoke of the gods. Let us create Lulu, the primitive worker. The council went silent. To create life was a grave undertaking. It required a sacrifice. To make the human, they needed the blood of a god mixed with the clay of the earth. They chose Kingu, a rebel deity, and from his blood and the red earth of Mesopotamia. The first human was fashioned, imagine Enki, in his laboratory within the Abzu. It is a place of cool mists and glowing minerals. Beside him stands Ninma, the mother goddess, her hands stained with the mud of the riverbank. They are working together, molding the clay, weaving the divine essence into the biological fabric of the earth. They created 7 men and 7 women. These were not the humans we are today, but the prototypes, the first inhabitants of a new world. When the breath of life was finally blown into their nostrils, the humans opened their eyes and looked upon their creators. They were small, fragile, and short-lived compared to the Anunnaki, but they possessed a tiny, flickering flame of the divine blood that ran through their veins. The labor was shifted. The shovels were handed from the hands of gods to the hands of men. The Ajiji returned to the stars, and the Anunnaki took their places as the kings and overseers of a burgeoning civilization. Now the story slows. The cities of Sumer rose from the dust like monuments to the stars. This was the era when the Anunnaki lived among men. They sat on high thrones in the centers of their cities, those massive stepped pyramids that reached toward the heavens like stony fingers in Eridu. Enki ruled from his house of the water. He taught humanity the arts of civilization, how to write, how to farm, how to track the movements of the planets. He was the protector of mankind, the one who whispered secrets into the ears of priests in Uruk. The goddess in Another, Queen of Heaven, reigned with a beauty that could stop the hearts of mortals. She was the morning and evening star, the goddess of love and war, a being of such intense passion that the very earth seemed to bloom wherever she stepped, and in the high seat of Nip, Enlil watched over the world with a cold, detached eye. He was the bringer of the Enlilship, the divine right of kings. To him, humanity was a truly useful, if noisy, addition to the world. During this time, the world was different. The atmosphere was thick with the presence of the divine. You could walk to the temple gates and know that inside, a literal god sat in the darkness, breathing the same air as you. The boundary between the physical and the spiritual did not exist. It was all one tapestry, woven with threads of gold and clay. But why did they leave? Why are the ziggurats now empty shells, eroded by the desert winds? The legends tell of a great flood, a cleansing of the earth brought about by Enlil's frustration with the clamor of humanity. They tell of wars between the gods, of terrible weapons that turned cities to ash. And eventually, they tell of the Anunnaki withdrawing, retreating back to the heights of heaven or the depths of the Abzu, leaving humanity to govern itself. Imagine yourself suspended in the velvet darkness of the deep cosmos, far beyond the reach of the sun's warming rays. Here, in the silent reaches between the stars, where the light of the solar system is but a distant, flickering memory, lies the world of the Anunnaki. It is a world named Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. Unlike the Earth, which dances in a nearly perfect circle around its star, Nibiru follows a path of immense, sweeping loneliness. It is a wanderer, a celestial nomad that travels on an elongated, elliptical orbit that takes 3,600 of our years to complete a single circuit. For most of its life, Nibiru is a creature of the dark, drifting through the frozen void, far past the icy reaches of Pluto. But as it begins its long, slow descent back toward the heart of our solar system, it awakens. Close your eyes and feel the stillness of this world. Nibiru is not a cold, dead rock. It is a living, breathing entity, warmed from within by its own radiant core. While the earth looks to the sun for its life, Nibiru draws its heat from its own Bowser deep, geothermal fire that keeps its oceans liquid and its atmosphere thick, even in the depths of the interstellar winter. As you stand upon its surface, the sky above you is not the bright blue of an earthly afternoon. It is a deep, shimmering violet, a hue of bruised plums and twilight shadows. Because the planet generates its own warmth, the atmosphere is perpetually filled with a soft, amber glow that rises from the ground, creating a world where there is no true night, only varying degrees of a luminous, golden dusk. Look up into that violet sky. You will see something that defies the laws of nature as we know them. High in the heavens, a faint, shimmering haze of gold dust hangs like a veil. This is the great work of the Anunnaki, a planetary shield of monatomic gold. suspended in the atmosphere to reflect the harsh radiation of the stars, and to trap the planet's internal heat during its long journey through the dark. This gold is the reason they first looked toward our world. It is the lifeblood of their planet. Without it, their atmosphere would bleed away into the vacuum, and their world would grow cold. This golden mist catches the light of the distant stars, creating a celestial tapestry that swirls and dances in the high winds, making the sky of Nibiru look like a living painting of liquid fire. The air here is thick and rich, smelling of ozone and ancient minerals. There is a weight to it, a pressure that feels like a constant, gentle embrace. Because of the planet's massive size, many times larger than the Earth, gravity pulls more firmly at your limbs. To walk on Nibiru is to move with a deliberate, slow grace, as if you are moving through water. Now, let your gaze descend from the golden sky to the horizon. There, rising like jagged shards of light from the reddish soil, are the cities of the Anunnaki. These are not cities of brick and mortar, nor of steel and glass. They are built of living crystal and resonant stone. The architecture is vast, designed for beings who stand far taller than any human. The buildings are geometric masterpieces, tetrahedrons and obsidian towers that pulse with a soft, rhythmic light. The Anunnaki do not use electricity as we understand it. Their technology is based on resonance, on the harmony of vibrations. The very walls of their homes hum with a low frequency that heals the body and calms the mind. Imagine a city like a garter of the heavens. It is a place of tiered gardens that float in the air, held aloft by magnetic currents. Fountains of liquid light spill from the heights of the towers, flowing into basins of white marble. The streets are paved with a translucent material that glows underfoot, reflecting the violet sky above. There is no noise here, no clamorous engines, no mechanical grind. There is only the sound of the wind through the crystal spires and the distant, melodic chanting of the priests in the high temples. At the heart of Nibiru's civilization is a structure as rigid and enduring as the stone of the planet itself. At the pinnacle sits Anu, the Great Father, the King of Nibiru. He is an entity of such age and wisdom that he has become more like a force of nature than a living being. He sits upon a throne of white lapis lazuli in the great assembly hall, a room so vast that clouds sometimes form near its ceiling. Beside him is Ontu, his consort, the Queen of the Heavens. Together, they represent the ultimate authority, the source of the Me, the divine decrees that govern everything from the movement of the stars to the laws of chemistry and social order. Beneath Anu are his two sons, whose rivalry would eventually shape the fate of humanity. First, there is Enlil, the Lord of the Command. He is the legal heir, the son of Anu and Ontu. Enlil is a being of order, discipline, and iron will. He is the guardian of the atmosphere and the commander of the planetary forces. To Enlil, the law is absolute. He views the universe as a machine that must be kept in perfect balance, and he has little patience for the chaotic whims of lesser beings. His presence is like a cold, bracing wind, powerful, necessary, but often unforgiving. Then there is Enki, the firstborn of Onu, but born to a different mother. Enki is the lord of the waters, the master of wisdom, and the great craftsman. While Enlil looks to the sky and the law, Enki looks to the earth and the soul. He is a scientist, a geneticist, and a dreamer. His home on Nibiru is the Abzu, a subterranean realm of vast oceans and hidden laboratories. Enki is a being of fluid grace and endless curiosity. It is he who understands the secrets of the DNA, the sacred clay of life. The tension between these two brothers is the heartbeat of Nibiru's history. It is a conflict between the preservation of the old ways and the evolution of the new, between the stern hand of the ruler and the compassionate heart of the creator. To understand the Anunnaki, you must understand their relationship with time. Their lifespans are tied to the orbit of their planet. One Shah, one circuit around the sun is, to them, but a single year of life. When an Anunnaki lord says he is 30 years old, he has lived for over 100,000 Earth years. This longevity has granted them a perspective that is almost impossible for a human mind to grasp. They do not rush. They plan in terms of millennia. They watch civilizations on other worlds rise and fall like the seasons of a single year. But this long life comes with a burden. It creates a sense of profound detachment, a feeling that the universe is a slow-moving theater in which they are the eternal spectators. Their knowledge is not learned in books, but imprinted into their very consciousness through the tablets of destiny, sophisticated information storage devices that contain the sum total of their science, history, and spiritual understanding. These tablets are not mere objects. They are keys to the fundamental fabric of reality. With them, the Anunnaki can manipulate gravity, fold space, and heal any ailment. Despite their godlike power, the Anunnaki are not without their struggles. Even as you stand in the beautiful crystalline cities of Nibiru, you can feel a sense of underlying anxiety. The golden shield in the sky is thinning. The internal fires of the planet are cooling. The council of the gods is often divided. There are the old ones who believe that Nibiru should remain isolated, accepting its fate as a natural part of the cosmic cycle. And there are the younger ones, led by figures like Marduk, Enki's ambitious son, who believe that they must reach out to other worlds to mine the resources they need to save their home, no matter the cost. This is the central tragedy of Nibiru. For all their advanced technology and ancient wisdom, they are still subject to the laws of entropy. They are a civilization on the brink of a slow, elegant decline. And it is this desperation that eventually drove them to cross the great void and seek the gold of the seventh planet, the Earth. Imagine standing now on the highest balcony of the royal palace in the city of Agada. The violet dusk is deepening. You look out over a landscape of glowing towers and floating gardens. In the distance, you see the great spaceports where the Shems, the celestial chariots, are prepared for their long journeys. These craft do not use fire or smoke. They glide on the magnetic ley lines of the solar system, silent as ghosts. The air around you is filled with the scent of a world that has existed for millions of years. You feel the presence of the Anunnaki all around you. They are tall, luminous beings, their skin possessing a slight metallic sheen, their eyes wide and deep. Reflecting the wisdom of 1,000 Shahs, they move with a quiet confidence, the confidence of those who have mastered the elements. But, as you watch them, you see a group of them looking toward the horizon. They are looking toward the inner solar system, toward a small blue speck of light that is just beginning to become visible as Nibiru approaches its crossing. They are looking at Earth. To them, Earth is a wild, untamed wilderness, a place of heat and moisture and chaotic life. It is a mining outpost, a laboratory, and eventually a home away from home. But for now, it is just a destination, a hope for the survival of their race, as the twin moons of Nibiru rise in the sky, casting a pale, silvery light over the crystalline spires. The hum of the city seems to soften. The Anunnaki retired to their chambers, where they sleep in pods of liquid light that rejuvenate their cells and allow their minds to travel through the astral realms. As we sit here in the quiet of the night, let us lean closer into the story, into the cold, darkening heart of the Anunnaki's homeworld. Imagine that the great geothermal fires, which for millions of years have pulsed like a rhythmic heartbeat within the planet's core, are beginning to stutter. The warmth that once rose from the red soil is now a thin, tepid breath. The crystalline cities, once vibrant with the hum of 1,000 resonances, have begun to grow silent on Nibiru. Life is not measured by the rise and fall of a sun, but by the integrity of the atmosphere. The sky shield, that shimmering veil of golden dust we spoke of, was tearing. It was not a sudden catastrophe, not a mountain falling from the sky, or a sea rising in a day, but a slow, agonizing erosion. Each time Nibiru made its crossing, swinging close to the searing radiation of the sun before plunging back into the abyss, a piece of its protective envelope was stripped away. The golden mist was thinning, and through the gaps, the harsh, unforgiving light of the cosmos began to bleed in. The crops in the hanging gardens of Agada began to wither. The water in the sacred fountains grew bitter. Most terrifyingly, the Anunnaki themselves, the immortals who measured their lives in Shazbeg, to feel the touch of a sickness. They had long forgotten the sickness of the sun. Their skin, once radiant as burnished copper, grew pale and brittle. Their children were born weak. The long life, the gift of the orbit, was becoming a curse of slow decay. In the great assembly hall of Onu, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy weight of unspoken fear. The 12 great gods sat in a circle of obsidian thrones, their faces illuminated from below by the soft, blue glow of the floor's power dash lines. At the center stood Enki, the lord of the deep. He did not wear the robes of a king, but the simple, shimmering tunic of a master scientist. In his hands he held a crystalline tableta, containing the data of the atmosphere's collapse. The shield is failing, Enki's voice echoed. A low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the hall. Within 10 shahs, the radiation will reach the lower levels. Nibiru will become a tomb of violet glass. We cannot simply repair the veil with the materials we have. We have exhausted our veins of the sacred metal. We have mined the moons. We have sifted the dust of the rings. There is no more gold. Across the circle, Enlil, the lord of the command, narrowed his eyes. His throne was positioned higher than the others, a symbol of his role as the executor of the law. And so Enlil spoke, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. You suggest we abandon the home of our ancestors. You suggest we become nomads, drifting through the void like common stardust. The law of Anu states that Nibiru is the center of the all. To leave is to admit that we are no longer masters of our destiny. It is not abandonment, brother, Enki countered softly. It is a hunt. My Shems, the long-range scanners, have detected a resonance. Deep within the 7th planet, beyond the hammered bracelet, there is gold. Not just veins, but mountains of it. The planet is young, wild, and heavy with the elements we need to heal our sky. The hall erupted in a low murmur. The 7th planet was what we now call Earth, to the Anunnaki, who counted the planets from the outside of the solar system inward. Earth was the 7th world they would encounter on their journey toward the sun. It was a place of legend, a remnant of the great collision between Tiamat and the celestial wanderer. The debate lasted for many cycles. This was the first great moral crisis of the Anunnaki. It was not merely a question of survival, but a question of ethics. Ninma, the Great Mother and Healer, stood to speak. Her voice was like the sound of a silver bell in a dark room. If we go to this seventh planet, we will be interlopers. We will disturb the balance of a world that is not ours. We are the architects of Nibiru, but we are not the masters of the cosmos. Is it right to save our world by scarring another? Enlil seized upon her words. Ninma speaks, the truth of the law. We are the Anunnakathos of the princely blood. We do not crawl in the mud of a primitive world. We do not soil our hands with the labor of the earth. If Nibiru is to end, let it end with dignity, according to the great cycle. But the desperation of the people was growing. Outside the hall, the common Anunnakitha Ijiji were beginning to protest. They saw the grey frost creeping into their homes. They saw their elders fading. For them, the high philosophy of Enlil was a cold comfort when the very air they breathed was thinning. Finally, Anu, the father of them all, raised his hand. The room fell into a silence so absolute it felt as though the planet itself had stopped spinning. Survival is the first law, Anu decreed. We will send an expedition, not as conquerors, but as harvesters. We will take only what is needed to repair the sky. Enki, you will lead the first Shem. You will find this gold, and you will bring it back to save our home. But hear me, do not wake the sleeping powers of that world. Take what we need and return. The balance must be maintained. Imagine the preparation for the departure. In the great spaceports of Nibiru, which were built onto the highest mountain peaks to be closer to the thinning atmosphere, the Shems were readied to the eyes of a modern human. These might look like ships of metal and fire, but in the memory of the ancient tablets, they were something far more poetic. They were sky chambers, vessels of light and resonance. They did not burn fuel. They rode the Mu, the invisible winds of the celestial magnetic field. The Anunnaki understood that the solar system is not a vacuum, but a web of vibrations. Each planet, each moon, each star sings a specific note. By tuning the crystalline cores of their ships to the frequency of their destination, they could slide through the fabric of space, pulled by the gravity of the worlds ahead and pushed by the light of the stars behind. Enki stood at the helm of the lead vessel, the Abzuga. It was a craft shaped like a winged disc, its surface covered in a material that shifted colors from deep indigo to brilliant gold depending on the angle of the cosmic rays. Inside, there were no buttons or screens. The pilots interacted with the ship through thought and touch, their consciousnesses merging with the me of the vessel as the Abzugar lifted off from the surface of Nibiru. The people below watched in silence. It was a flickering spark of hope ascending into a sky that was growing dangerously clear. They watched until the spark was swallowed by the violet twilight, leaving behind only the cold, biting wind of the waning world. The journey was not easy. Between the outer planets and the inner sanctum of the solar system lay the hammered bracelet, what we know today as the asteroid belt in Sumerian mythology. This was the debris of the great battle between the god Marduk and the dragon Tiamat. It was a graveyard of shattered worlds, a chaotic swirl of jagged rocks and frozen ice that guarded the path to Earth. Imagine the tension inside the Abzugal as they approached this celestial barrier. The ship's crystalline hull hummed with a frantic, high-pitched vibration. Outside, the darkness was filled with the silent, tumbling shapes of asteroids the size of cities. The path of the ancestors is blocked, the pilot whispered, his hands hovering over the control pillars. Enki closed his eyes, his mind reaching out into the chaos. He was looking for the key of the crossing, a narrow corridor of stability created by the gravitational tug-of-war between Jupiter and Mars. "The resonance is there," Enki commanded. "Follow the silver thread. Do not look at the stones. Look at the music between them." The ship began to dance. It moved with a fluid, liquid grace, dodging the ancient debris by fractions of a degree. The Anunnaki crew held their breath. They were miles from home, suspended in a graveyard of worlds, with nothing but the wisdom of Enki and the integrity of their crystal hull between them and oblivion. When they finally broke through the inner edge of the bracelet, the view changed. The chaos vanished, replaced by the serene, sun-drenched emptiness of the inner system. And there, in the distance, hanging like a sapphire in the dark, was the seventh planet. As Earth grew larger in the viewing portals, the Anunnaki was struck by a sensation they had not felt in generations. The sensation of vibrancy. Nibiru was a world of deep purples, ambers, and shadows. Earth was a riot of colors. It was a world of blinding blues, lush greens, and swirling, brilliant whites. It was a world that was literally overflowing with the energy of the sun, the very energy that was killing Nibiru. "It is beautiful," Ninma whispered, for she had joined the expedition as the chief medical officer. "It is so full of life that it hurts to look upon it." But Enki's eyes were not on the beauty. He was looking at the sensors. He was looking for the gold. "The resonance is strongest in the lower hemisphere," Enki noted. "In the land of the deep waters, where the rivers meet the sea. There, the veins of the sacred metal lie close to the surface, washed clean by the rains of this wild world." They began their descent. As the Abzagal entered the Earth's atmosphere, the friction of the air turned the golden hull into a streak of fire across the sky. "The world you are entering now is a world of absolute heavy silence, before the first stone of the first city was ever laid. Before the first word was ever carved into clay, the earth was a vast, breathing wilderness of green and blue. It was a place where time did not move in years or centuries, but in the slow, rhythmic pulse of the seasons and the shifting of the tides. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of the Mesopotamian marshlands, long before they were called by that name. The air is thick, so much thicker than the air we breathe today. It is rich with the scent of damp earth, crushed ferns, and the salt sting of the sea. There are no sounds of machines, no distant hum of electronics. There is only the wind through the towering reeds, the occasional splash of a massive creature in the dark water, and the immense, crushing weight of a sky that has never known the glow of artificial light. This was the Earth of the first time, a world of giants, giant trees that reached toward the clouds, giant beasts that roamed the plains, and a silence that felt like a living thing. Watching and waiting in the shadows of the caves and the high mountain ridges, there were others. They were the Abzagal, the primitive ones, the ancestors of humanity. They were creatures of hair and bone, living by the instinct of the hunt and the fear of the dark. To them, the world was a collection of spirits, the spirit of the lightning, the spirit of the river, the spirit of the hunger that gnawed at their bellies. They did not know they were small. They did not know they were alone, until the day the sky broke. It began as a ripple in the high atmosphere. The primitive ones, huddled together for warmth in the pre-dawn chill, were the first to see it. Then the morning star, more intense than the moon, did not fade as the sun began to rise. It grew larger. It did not twinkle. It roared. Imagine the terror of a mind that has no word for ship, no concept of metal, no understanding of the stars as anything other than holes in the velvet of the night. To the Abigail, it was as if the eye of the universe itself was opening, and it was burning with a terrible golden light. The Shem, the celestial chariot of the Anunnakidis, ascended through the clouds like a mountain made of fire. It did not fall. It commanded the air. As it drew closer to the marshes of the Persian Gulf, the very atmosphere seemed to vibrate. The birds fell silent. The great predators of the plains slunk into the tall grass, their tails between their legs. The water of the Gulf began to churn, forced outward by an invisible, crushing pressure. When the craft finally touched the water, the sound was not a crash, but a deep, resonant thrummer frequency so low it could be felt in the marrow of the primitive's bones. Steam rose in vast white pillars, obscuring the sun. And then, for a long, agonizing moment, the silence returned. But it was a different silence. The world was no longer alone. From the safety of the reeds, eyes wide with a fear that transcended thought, the primitive ones watched. They saw a door open in the side of the fire mountain. They were not like the Abigail. They were tall, terrible in their height. Their skin did not look like skin. It shimmered with a pale, metallic luster, reflecting the morning sun in ways that hurt the primitive eyes to look upon. They wore garments that seemed to be woven from the light of the moon, blue and silver fabrics that moved like water. On their heads were helmets that caught the sun, and on their backs were strange, humming devices that allowed them to move through the thick mud as if they were walking on air. Through the eyes of the primitive human, Enki was not a man, and he was not an animal. He was the world spirit made flesh. When he spoke, it was not the grunts and clicks of the Abigail. His voice was a melody, a sequence of tones that felt like the rushing of a river and the whisper of the wind combined. He carried a staff that glowed with a soft, blue light, and wherever he stepped, the very earth seemed to settle and obey. The primitives watched him lean down and touch the water of the Gulf. They watched him taste the salt. They watched him look up at the sun with an expression of profound, ancient sagista, look of a king who has traveled across a desert to find a well, only to realize the well is guarded by a lion. To the Abigail, this was the birth of the gods. In their simple, terrified minds, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was erased in a single heartbeat. These were the masters of the fire. These were the weavers of the light. In the days that followed, the primitive ones witnessed a miracle that would be whispered in their oral traditions for 1,000 generations. The Anunnaki did not live in caves. They did not hunt with stones. They began to transform the landscape. Imagine the shock of seeing a solid structure rise from the mud in a matter of days. The Anunnaki used me, the divine blueprints. They held devices that emitted beams of concentrated light, cutting through the heavy basalt of the distant mountains as if it were soft clay. They moved stones that 100 Abigail could not budge, floating them through the air with the sound of a low, humming song to the primitive watchers. Eridu was not a city. It was a living organism. Its walls were white and smooth as bone. Its towers reached toward the sky, capped with gold that caught the first and last rays of the sun. At night, the city did not go dark. It pulsed with a soft amber glow, a beacon of order in a world of chaotic shadows. The Anunnaki moved through the city with a purpose that the primitives could not grasp. They were digging. They were building canals to lead the fresh water into the salt. They were measuring the stars with long, silver instruments. The Abigail began to draw closer, driven by a mixture of paralyzing fear and an irresistible, soul-deep curiosity. They crept to the edge of the Anunnaki's clearing. They left offerings the best of their kills, the rarest of the river stones, the perimeter of the holy ground. They did not seek to speak. They sought to appease the giants who had fallen from the stars. We must try to understand the magnitude of this misunderstanding. When an Anunnaki lord like Enlil looked at a primitive human, he saw a biological specimen, a clever animal, perhaps, but something as distant from his own intellect as a dog is from a scientist. He saw a creature of short life and limited potential, a byproduct of the Earth's wild evolution. But when the primitive human looked at Enlil, he saw a being of infinite time. The Anunnaki did not seem to age. The Abigal watched their own grandfathers wither and die, while the Shining Ones remained unchanged, their faces as smooth and stern as the day they arrived. The Anunnaki did not seem to eat the food of the earth. They consumed the bread of life and the water of life within their glowing halls. They could see things that were invisible. They could hear the whispers of the wind. They could strike a man dead with a gesture of their silver wands. This was the origin of awe. It was a fear so great it turned into worship. The primitive ones began to mimic the gods. They tried to stand taller. They tried to make sounds that resembled the Anunnaki's language. They began to perceive the world through the lens of the above and the below. The earth was the realm of the mud and the hunger. The sky was the realm of the Shining Ones, the place where the fire mountains went when they left the world, while Enki looked upon the primitives with a scientist's curiosity and, perhaps, a spark of a father's compassion. His brother Enlil viewed them with a cold, aristocratic disdain. To Enlil, the Abigal were a nuisance. Their cries disturbed the silence of the earth. Their presence fouled the perimeter of the command center. Imagine a group of primitives accidentally wandering too close to a sensitive piece of Anunnaki technology. The air would suddenly crackle with static. A wall of invisible force would throw them backward, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Enlil did not use words to warn them. He used the Enlil ship, the raw power of the atmosphere. He would command the clouds to gather, the thunder to roll, and the lightning to strike the ground in a terrifying display of authority. To the primitives, this was not a leader managing a workspace. This was the Lord of the Storm expressing his divine wrath. They learned to fear the shadow of Enlil's Shem as it passed over their lands. They learned that the gods could be temperamental, that their favor was a fragile thing, and that to cross them was to invite the fire of the heavens. As the months turned into years, the Anunnaki settled into their long labor. The initial awe of their arrival began to settle into a permanent, structured reality. In the mountains of the Abzu, the southern regions of Africa, the great mines were opened. The silence of the ancient earth was replaced by the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the automated drills and the deep subterranean groans of the earth being opened. The primitives were recruited not as slaves yet, but as observers and occasional helpers. They were taught to carry the baskets of ore. They were taught to stay away from the worry wheels. In exchange, the Anunnaki gave them gifts: a knife of metal that never blunted, a grain that grew 10 times faster than the wild grasses, a medicine that could pull a child back from the edge of the great sleep. The air in the subterranean mines of the Abzu had grown thick with more than just dust and heat. It was thick with the scent of revolution. 440 Shahs. Nearly 144,000 of our years, the Igigi, the lesser gods of the Anunnaki, had been the backbone of the gold mining operation. They were the ones who descended into the lightless depths of the earth, their luminous skin clouded by the red soil of Africa, their immortal limbs aching with a wariness that was never meant for the divine. They were the laborers of the stars, forgotten by the high lords in the cool, breezy ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Imagine the sound of 10,000 bronze picks striking the earth in a rhythmic, mournful pulse. Then, imagine that sound stopping. All at once, the silence that followed was more terrifying than any storm Enlil could conjure. The Agigi had reached their breaking point. They set fire to their tools. They gathered in the darkness, their eyes glowing with a desperate, defiant light, and they began the long march toward the city of the gods. They did not come to petition. They came to demand a release from the yoke. This was the moment that forced the hand of the heavens. This was the moment that the Anunnaki decided that the earth needed something new, something that had never existed in the grand design of the cosmos. It was the birth of the human in the aftermath of the rebellion. When the Great Council sat in a state of paralyzed indecision, it was Enki, the Prince of Wisdom, who stepped forward. He did not seek to punish the Agigi. He understood their suffering, for he had walked the mines with them. "There is a way," Enki whispered, his voice resonating through the hushed hall. "We do not need to force our brothers to labor. We can create a substitute, a creature with the intelligence of a god, but the resilience of the earth. We will create the Lulu, the primitive worker." The council was skeptical. To create life was to play with the very fires of the universe. It was an act of supreme arrogance and terrifying responsibility, but the gold was still needed. The sky of Nibiru was still thinning. Necessity, as it so often does, silenced the voice of morality. Enki led the way to the house of Shimteeth, the house where the breath of life is blown. This was not a place of stone and mortar, but a sanctum of light and liquid. Imagine a vast, vaulted chamber deep beneath the earth, where the walls were made of a living, translucent crystal that pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent green. In the center of the room stood great vats of a shimmering, golden fluid, the primordial soup of creation. Beside Enki stood Ninmah, the mother goddess, the supreme healer. She was the only one with the delicate touch required for the work ahead. Together, they prepared to perform the ultimate alchemy. The creation of humanity was not a simple act of magic. It was a complex, arduous process of genetic weaving. The Anunnaki knew that the blood was the carrier of the soul, the tima, or the memory of the essence. To create a being that could understand the commands of the gods, they needed to bridge the gap between the divine and the terrestrial. They chose a sacrificer, young Agigi lord named Wea, who had been one of the leaders of the rebellion. It was a poetic and brutal irony. The blood of a rebel would become the life force of a servant. "Mix the clay from the foundation of the earth," Enki commanded, "with the blood of the god. Let the divine and the mortal become one." Ninmah's hands, stained with the red earth of the Abzu and the shimmering ichor of the deity, worked the mixture with the focus of a master sculptor. They were not just making a body, they were writing a code. They took the DNA of the Abigal, the primitive, hominids that already roamed the earth, and they bound it with the celestial essence of the Anunnaki. They were looking for a balance. Too much of the god and the creature would be too powerful, too rebellious, too much like its creators. Too little, and it would be a mindless animal, incapable of the complex tasks required in the mines, for cycles beyond counting. The laboratory was a place of shadows and whispers. There were failures, monstrous prototypes that could not speak, or whose limbs were twisted, or who lacked the spark of awareness. Ninmah wept over these failures, her heart breaking for the broken things they had brought into the world. But Enki, driven by the cold logic of survival, pressed on. Finally, There came a morning when the air in the house of Shimti felt different. The light in the vats had settled into a steady, warm amber. Ninma reached into the fluid and pulled forth a form. It was a male. His skin was smooth, the color of the red clay from which he was fashioned, but with a faint underlying glow of the divine blood. He was smaller than an Anunnaki, but far more refined than the wild Abigail. Ninma held the creature in her arms, her own breath hitching in her chest. She leaned down and pressed her lips to his nostrils, blowing the breath of life into his lungs. For a long, terrifying minute, there was no movement. Then, a shudder, a small, gasping intake of air. The creature's eyes opened. They were not the wild animal eyes of the forest dwellers. They were deep, dark, and filled with a sudden, flickering intelligence. "I have created," Ninma cried out, her voice echoing through the crystalline halls. "My hands have made it." They named him Adamutha. One of the Red Earth, Adamu, did not speak at first. He looked at Enki and Ninma with a gaze that was both haunting and beautiful. In that moment, the emotional distance between the creator and the creation vanished. Ninma did not see a worker. She saw a son. Enki did not see a tool. He saw a miracle. But outside the doors of the laboratory, the rest of the Anunnaki were waiting. For them, Adamu was the answer to a labor problem. For them, the primitive worker was a triumph of engineering, not a soul to be cherished. One man was not enough. To replace the Agigi, they needed a population. Enki and Ninma returned to the vats. Using the me of Adamu, they created a female Timot, the mother of life. From her, and from the sophisticated incubation processes developed in the house of Shemti, they created 7 men and 7 women. Imagine these 14 beings standing in the light of the Mesopotamian sun for the first time. They were beautiful in their simplicity. They were innocent. They had been given the gift of understanding, the ability to use tools, and the capacity for language. But they had also been given the yoke. The Anunnaki taught them how to till the soil, how to dig the canals, and how to descend into the deep mines of the Absu. The labor that had broken the gods was now the purpose of the humans. But something unexpected began to happen. The humans were not just workers. They were observers. They watched the gods. They listened to their songs. They began to develop their own thoughts, their own questions. They looked at the ziggurats and wondered why they were at the bottom while the shining ones were at the top. The great council of the Anunnaki, led by the stern Enlil, was satisfied. The gold was flowing again. Nibiru's sky was being repaired. The rebellion of the Agigi had been quelled. However, Enlil grew concerned. He saw the humans multiplying. He saw the way they looked at the gods no longer with pure animal fear, but with a growing sense of kinship. "They are too many," Enlil argued in the council. "They are loud. Their clamor disturbs my sleep. We have given them too much of ourselves. They are a danger to the order of the world." Enlil wanted to keep the humans as mere biological automatons. He forbade the teaching of the higher me, the secrets of math, astronomy, and the deep sciences. He wanted them to remain in a state of permanent childhood, subservient and silent. But Enki, the secret father of humanity, could not allow his children to be stunted. In the darkness of the night, he would walk among the human settlements. He would sit by their fires and whisper secrets. He taught them the art of writing, the tongue of the gods. He taught them how to track the movements of the planets, so they would know when their creators would return to the stars. This was the first great divide among the gods. On one side, Enlil, the Lord of Order, who viewed humanity as a temporary utility. On the other, Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, who viewed humanity as a legacy. This conflict reached its peak in the Garden of Edi, on the home of the gods in Mesopotamia. It was here that Enki performed his most daring act of defiance. He gave the humans the tree of knowledge, not a literal tree, but the understanding of their own biological nature, their own mortality, and their own potential for reproduction. Up until this point, the humans had been created in the laboratory. They could not reproduce on their own. Enki adjusted their genetic code, giving them the knowing, the ability to pass on the spark of life from one generation to the next without the intervention of the gods. Imagine the burden Enki carried. He had created a race that was destined to outlast the gods on this planet. He looked at Adamu and Tiamat and saw the reflection of his own soul, but trapped in a body that would wither and die in a fraction of a shah. He felt a profound, aching compassion for them. He saw them struggle with the cold, with hunger, and with the confusing, overwhelming emotions that came with their new knowing. If you listen closely, past the rustle of the modern world, you can hear the echoes of that ancient shift. The earth was no longer a silent laboratory or a quiet mining outpost. It had become a world of voices. Millions of voices. The black-headed ones, the children of Enki and Ninmah, had multiplied. They had spread from the marshes of Eridu to the plains of Shurpa, building their own small dwellings of reed and mud, lighting their own fires, and singing their own songs. But this growth, this vibrant explosion of life, brought with it a shadow that stretched across the halls of the gods. It was a shadow of discord, a rift that opened between the two most powerful beings on the planet, the two brothers, Enlil and Enki. Their conflict was not merely a sibling rivalry. It was a collision of two entirely different visions for the universe. It was a struggle between the law of the sky and the love of the earth. Tonight, let us walk the halls of their palaces and listen to the heavy, mournful weight of their disagreement. This is the tragedy of the two lords, a story of how humanity became the battleground for the souls of the gods in the city of Nippur, the religious and political heart of the Anunnaki's earth. Stood the Akur, house of the mountain. This was the seat of Enlil, the lord of the air. Imagine a structure of such immense proportions that its shadow could cover an entire village. It was a fortress of order, a place where the wind always blew cold and clean. Enlil's throne room was at the very summit, a chamber of polished obsidian where the stars seemed to hang just beyond the reach of his hand. Enlil sat upon his throne, his eyes fixed on the tablets of destiny, the shimmering, crystalline records that held the blueprints for the entire mission. To Enlil, the mission was everything. The Anunnaki had come for gold to save Nibiru. They had created the human as a temporary tool to extract that gold. The logic was simple, mathematical, and absolute. But as he looked down from his height, Enlil did not see a successful workforce. He saw a chaotic, sprawling mess. They are too many, Enlil would whisper to his advisors, his voice like the low roll of thunder before a storm. They breed like the insects in the marsh. They fill the air with their cries, their laughter, their mourning. They have forgotten their place as the primitive worker. They build for themselves. They dream for themselves. They have become a noise that the universe never intended to hear. For Enlil, humanity was a biological mistake that was rapidly spiraling out of control. He believed in the divine order hierarchy, where the gods were the masters and the earth was a resource to be managed. Every human breath was a vibration that disturbed the celestial harmony. He felt a profound sense of environmental grief, a mourning for the silent, pristine earth that existed before the clamor of man. He was the guardian of the law, and in his eyes, the law had been violated the moment Enki gave the humans the ability to reproduce and the spark of independent thought. Hundreds of miles away, in the lush, humid delta of the Persian Gulf, lay Eridu, the city of the water. Here, in the Eobs, lived Enki. His palace was the inverse of Enlil's, where the Iku reached for the cold stars. The Iabzu descended into the warm, dark depths of the subterranean ocean. The walls were made of living coral and translucent stone, and the rooms were filled with the gentle, rhythmic sound of flowing water. And Kai did not sit on a high throne looking down. He walked among his people. He sat in the laboratories with his scientists and in the gardens with his human craftsmen. To Enki, humanity was not a tool. They were his greatest work. They were a new form of life that combined the resilience of the earth with the wisdom of the heavens. They are not a noise, Brother Enki would argue in his mind, rehearsing the debates he knew were coming. They are a symphony. They are the voice that the earth has been waiting to find. We did not just create a worker. We created a successor. We have planted a seed of Nibiru in the soil of this world, and it is our duty to watch it bloom. Enki believed in evolution. He saw the humans' clamor not as a disturbance, but as the messy, beautiful process of a species finding its soul. He viewed himself as a father, a mentor, and a protector. He had secretly woven into the human DNA the capacity for art, for music, and for the divine secrets of civilization. He wanted a world where gods and men lived in a partnership. A world where the earth was not just a mine, but a home. The tension between the two brothers eventually spilled over into the assembly of the 12. This was the supreme political body of the Anunnaki, where the 7 who decree decided the fate of the world. Imagine the scene, the 12 thrones arranged in a circle, the air shimmering with the power of the gathered deities. In the center stood the tablets of destiny. Enlil stood to speak, his presence filling the room like a heavy shroud. The primitive worker has exceeded its mandate, he declared. The earth is defiled by their numbers. They no longer serve the mission. They serve themselves. They have become a threat to the stability of our settlements. I move that we limit their span, that we withdraw the me, and that we return to the original plan of a controlled, silent workforce. Enki rose, his voice fluid and persuasive. To destroy what we have built is to admit failure. The humans have proven themselves capable of more than labor. They have built temples to our names. They track the stars. They offer us the best of their fields. Why do we fear their growth? Is it because we are afraid that one day they will no longer need us? The room was divided. The old guard, those who had come from Nibiru and still longed for its ordered perfection, sided with Enlil. They were tired of the heat, the insects, and the unpredictable nature of the earthly life. They wanted the mission finished so they could return home. The younger generation, the Anunnaki who had been born on Earth, like Enki's son Marduk and Inanna, felt a kinship with the world and its people. They saw the humans as a source of power, as followers who could bolster their own influence. The political struggle was a chess match of me. Enlil would use his authority to restrict the flow of technology to the humans. He would decree that certain cities be abandoned, that the lifespan of the human be shortened by altering the environmental filters. Enki, in response, would engage in divine subversion. He would visit the human kings in their dreams, whispering the secrets of irrigation, medicine, and architecture. He would hide the me in the temples, ensuring that even if the gods withdrew, the knowledge would remain. As the centuries passed, the clamor grew to the Anunnaki, who experienced time differently. The rapid growth of humanity was like a fever. In one of Enlil's Shahs, dozens of human generations would live and die. To him, it looked like a frantic, vibrating blur of activity. The earth is bellowing like a wild bull. Enlil cried out in the council, "I cannot sleep." The prayers, the sacrifices, the shouting of their market sit is a wall of sound that never ends. This sleep that Enlil sought was not just physical rest. It was the cosmic silence, the state of meditative equilibrium that the Anunnaki required to maintain their long lives and their connection to the source. The human presence was literally draining the spiritual energy of the gods. Enlil began to implement the decrees of diminishing. First came the droughts. He commanded the Adad, the storm god, to hold back the rains. He watched from the Ecor as the human fields turned to dust and the black-headed ones cried out in hunger. Let them learn the cost of their clamor. Enlil said coldly, but Enki would not let his children perish. He showed the humans how to dig deeper wells, how to tap into the Abzu, the underground reservoirs of fresh water. He taught them how to store grain in massive silos of stone. When the drought failed to break the humans, Enlil sent the plagues. He released biological agents into the winds, sicknesses that the human body, with its shorter lifespan and weaker immune system, could not fight. Again, Enki intervened. He brought the healers to the house of Shimti and showed them the herbs of the field and the minerals of the earth that could counter the plagues. He turned the very curse of Enlil into a lesson in resilience for humanity. The conflict was tearing the Anunnaki family apart. Ninmah, the mother goddess who had helped create the humans, was caught in the middle. She loved her brother Enlil and respected his vision of order, but her heart belonged to the children she had molded with her own hands. She would walk through the human cities in disguise, seeing the suffering caused by Enlil's decrees. She saw the mothers weeping over their sick children, and she saw the fathers working the parched earth until they collapsed. Is this what we are? She asked Enki one night in the gardens of Eridu. Are we gods who create life only to torture it? If we are the masters of the universe, why is our house filled with so much sorrow? Enki looked at the moon, which was reflecting the light of the sun, the same sun that was drying up the earth. We are in a tragedy of our own making. Enlil loves the idea of the universe. I love the fact of it. He wants a perfect museum. I want a living garden. And in a garden, there is always decay. There is always noise. There is always death. The sky above the earth was no longer the brilliant, hopeful blue of the first time. It had become a heavy, suffocating shroud of iron grey and bruised violet, high above the clouds. Within the shimmering metallic hulls of their orbital stations, the Anunnaki watched. They did not look down with the pride of creators, but with the weary, clinical detachment of those watching a fire consume a field they no longer have the strength to tend. For 40 Shahs, the humans, the Lula had thrived. They had filled the valleys with their cities and the air with their restless, unending clamor. To Enlil, the Lord of the Command, this sound was a parasite. It gnawed at the divine silence. It disrupted the delicate frequencies of the Anunnaki's immortality. The primitive worker had become a chaotic force of nature, and in the cold mathematics of Enlil's mind, the equation was simple: to save the order of the cosmos. The noise of the earth had to be extinguished, but this was not merely a matter of divine frustration. The heavens themselves were preparing to strike. Nibiru, the great wanderer, was drawing close for its celestial crossing. Its massive gravitational shadow was already tugging at the Earth's heart, pulling at the tectonic plates and the ice caps of the south. The planet was tilting, groaning under the weight of an approaching catastrophe that no human prayer could avert. The great Council of the 12 was held in a chamber of absolute obsidian. No light entered from the outside. The only illumination came from the glowing glyphs of the tablets of destiny that floated in the center of the room. Enlil stood, his presence a dark pillar of iron will. "The time of the crossing is upon us," he announced, his voice vibrating in the marrow of the gods. "The ice of the south will slip. The waters will rise and reclaim the land. It is not our hand that strikes, but the hand of the universe. We will not intervene. We will not warn. We will let the waters cleanse the earth of the clamor." He looked at each god in turn, his gaze stopping finally on his brother Enki. "We shall swear an oath, a bond of silence that cannot be broken. Not a word, not a whisper, not a sign shall be given to the seed of man. They were born of the clay. Let them return to the clay." One by one, the gods touched the tablet of destiny. They swore by the name of Anu, the Sky Father. Even Ninmah, the mother who had molded the first human with her own hands, bowed her head and whispered the oath of silence, her eyes wet with the first tears an immortal had shed in an eon. Enki was the last. He placed his hand on the crystalline surface. He felt the vibration of the coming flood, the screams of millions, the drowning of his libraries, the end of his masterpiece. He spoke the words. He swore the oath. But as the council dismissed, his mind was already weaving a path through the impossible dot. In the city of Shuruppak, there lived a man named Zeusudra. He was a king of the old style, a man of quiet wisdom who spent his nights in the temple of Enki, tending the sacred fires and listening to the rhythmic hum of the earth. He was the one of long life, a human who had been granted a spark of the higher me by his divine patron. One night, the air in Shuruppak grew strangely still. The animals had fled to the high hills days before. The birds had stopped singing. Zeusudra sat inside his hut, built of tightly woven reeds and plastered with the red mud of the riverbank. He felt a presence outside, not a physical person, but a vibration that made the very air feel heavy and sweet. Suddenly, a voice began to speak. It did not come from the air, and it did not come from a person. It seemed to come from the wall of the hut itself. "Wall, listen to me," the voice whispered, a low, melodic rumble like the sound of a distant ocean. "Reed hut, hear my words. Pay heed to my instructions." It was Enki. He had sworn an oath not to speak to any man, but he had not sworn an oath not to speak to a wall. In the clever, loophole-seeking mind of the Lord of Wisdom, the wall would be his witness, and if a man happened to be sitting on the other side, that was merely the will of the wind. "Tear down your house, Zeusudra," the wall whispered. "Abandon your possessions. Seek only life. Build a vessel of great proportions. Let its length be equal to its width. Roof it over like the Abzu, so the sun does not see inside. Seal it with bitumen and pitch. Into this vessel you must take the seed of all living things, the birds, the beasts of the field, and the kin of your house." Zeusudra sat in the darkness, his heart hammering like a trapped bird. He did not ask why. He did not question the voice of the wall. He knew the scent of Enki. He knew the resonance of the divine. He stood and walked to the wall, pressing his ear against the reeds. "How much time do I have, my lord?" he whispered. "The 7 judges of the deep are already at their posts," the wall replied, the voice fading into the rustle of the wind. "When the Lord of the Storm turns the day into darkness, when the clouds bleed black water, you must enter. Close the hatch. Leave the rest to the great deep." The days that followed were a fever of activity in the middle of a dying world. Ziusudra called his family, his wife, his sons, and their wives. He did not tell them of the god's whisper. He told them he had offended Enlil, and that he must sail away to the Absu to live with his master. "Enki, we must build a boat that can ride the belly of the sea," he told the craftsmen of Shurupuk. Imagine the scene, a massive, square-based structure rising in the middle of the city. It was not a ship for the river. It was a life preserver, a massive cube of cedar and red, 6 decks high, divided into 7 times 7 compartments. The people of the city watched with curiosity and mockery. They saw the king pouring barrels of precious oil and bitumen over the hull. They saw him herding pairs of wild animals into the dark hold the cattle of the plain, the lions of the hills, the serpents of the dust. Ziusudra worked with a desperate, quiet intensity. He watched the sky. He saw the sun becoming a pale, sickly disk. He saw the moon turning the color of dried blood. In the high heavens, Enlil watched the construction of the vessel. He saw the clutter on the landscape, but he assumed it was merely another human Pholion, another temple or monument built in a desperate attempt to appease the gods. He did not see the hand of his brother in the design. He did not realize that the primitive worker was building a bridge to the future. The day of the catastrophe arrived not with a bang, but with a terrifying, unnatural silence. The Anunnaki had boarded their ships. The Shems lifted off from the ziggurats, their engines creating a halo of blue light that cut through the darkening atmosphere. From the windows of their craft, the gods looked down one last time at the world they had governed for millions of years, the Anunnaki of the deep. The 7 judges of the underworld raised their torches. These were not mythical figures, but the massive gravitational and seismic triggers that the gods had set in place. The earth split. The foundations of the southern ice caps shattered, sliding into the ocean with a sound that could be heard across the globe. The sky turned black. The sun vanished, replaced by a wall of water and cloud that seemed to reach the very edge of space. Adad, the storm god, rode upon the clouds, his roar shattering the mountains. Nergal tore out the posts of the celestial dams, and Ninurta let the waters break over the dikes. Ziusudra ushered his family into the dark interior of the boat. The last to enter were the small, frightened animals. As the first heavy black drops of rain began to fall, drops the size of a man's fist, Ziusudra pulled the great hatch shut and sealed it with the last of the pitch. He stood in the darkness, surrounded by the smell of wet fur and the sound of his family's frantic breathing. Then the earth moved. As the great flood swept across the plains, it did not just drown the humans. It tore the very skin off the world. The cities of Eridu, Nippur, and Uruk were vanished in an instant, buried under 100 feet of churning, silt-laden water from their orbital ships. The Anunnaki watched the destruction, and for the first time they felt a sensation they had never known: regret. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, wailed like a woman in labor. The olden days have turned to clay. She cried, her face pressed against the glass of the observation portal. I have given birth to my people, and now they fill the sea like the spawn of fish. Why did I agree to this? Why did I follow the word of Enlil? Ninmah, the mother goddess, sat in a corner of the ship, her body shaking with sobs. She looked at her hands, the hands that had fashioned Adamond. She saw them as the hands of a murderer. The gods huddled together, cold and hungry. For the atmosphere of the earth was so churned by the storm that even their advanced life support systems struggled to maintain the me of their comfort. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind blew. The deluge swept over the land like a giant's broom. The gods watched as the clamor they had hated was replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like the end of the universe. In the darkness of the boat, Ziusudra and his family were tossed like a leaf in a gale. They could hear the water screaming against the hull. They could feel the massive weight of the waves trying to crush them. They sat in the dark, praying to a god they hoped could still hear them through the roar of the world's end. Imagine the world as it emerged from the Great Deluge, a world wiped clean. A canvas of grey silt and glistening mud, stretching from the mountains of the north to the edge of the southern sea. The roar of the storm has been replaced by a silence so profound it feels as though the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if life will truly return. High above, in the celestial chariots that had hovered in the safety of the orbit, the Anunnaki looked down upon the wreckage of their dominion. They saw the ruins of Eridu buried under leagues of sediment. They saw the golden ziggurats, once the pride of the cosmos, now looking like jagged teeth protruding from a wasteland of water. Even Enlil, the lord of the command, who had willed this silence into being, felt a coldness in his heart that no divine fire could warm. He had sought to end the clamor, but in the absolute stillness that followed, he realized that a world without voices was a world without a soul. Then, from the peaks of the mountains where the ark had found its rest, a thin plume of smoke began to rise. Ziusudra, the human who had survived by Enki's secret whisper, had lit a fire. He was offering a sacrifice not out of obligation, but out of a desperate, primal gratitude. The scent of the burning herbs and the roasted meat drifted upward, catching the nostrils of the gods. They descended like a flock of birds, their ships settling onto the muddy earth. In that moment, the second time began. This was not the era of the primitive worker in the mines. This was the era of Sumartha, era of the reconstructed world, where humanity would no longer be a mere tool, but the stewards of the divine legacy, the reconciliation between the two brothers. Enlil and Enki took place in the damp, cool air of the post-flood dawn. There were no more shouts of defiance, no more political chess matches. The destruction was so total that the only path forward was cooperation. Enlil looked at Ziusudra, the small, trembling human who had saved the seed of life, and he did something he had never done before. He reached out and touched the man's brow. He blessed the survivors. "The earth shall be yours to dwell upon," Enlil decreed, his voice softened by the weight of the tragedy. "We will no longer seek to silence you. Instead, we will give you the kingship. We will lower from the heavens the blueprints of civilization, and you shall build the world in our image." This was the new covenant. The Anunnaki would remain the masters of the divine laws of reality, but they would transmit this knowledge to humanity through a chosen lineage of kings. Imagine the scene at the first great city to rise from the mud, Kish, here. The kingship was lowered from heaven. It was a transition of power. The gods began to retreat into the inner sanctums of the Zig, while the human Lugaltha, big man, stood at the gate. interpreting the divine will for the people. On Nibiru, knowledge was imprinted into the consciousness. On prehistoric Earth, it was carried in the fleeting breath of oral tradition. But in the new world of Enki knew that humanity needed a way to hold on to the truth across the vast stretches of time. He gave them the gift of writing. Imagine a scribe sitting in the shadow of a temple wall in the city of Uruk. The air is warm, smelling of the drying river mud. In his hand, he holds a reed from the marsh, sharpened into a wedge-shaped stylus. Before him is a tablet of wet, soft clay. The scribe does not draw pictures. He creates symbols, the cuneiform. Each rhythmic press of the reed is a sound, a concept, a memory frozen in stone. This is the stylus of the gods. The temple priests would tell the young initiates, "With this, you will record the grain in the silos, the movement of the planets, and the stories of the first time. A man may die, but the tablet remains. The clay is the memory of the world." Writing changed the human soul. It allowed for the accumulation of wisdom. For the first time, a grandson could read the thoughts of his grandfather. The clamor that Enlil had feared was becoming structured, melodic, and permanent. The humans were no longer just living in the present. They were building a history. While Enki gave the humans the tools of the mind, Enlil gave them the tools of the earth. He showed them how to master the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The flood had left the land fertile but chaotic. The rivers changed their paths at will, drowning the fields in one season and leaving them parched in the next. Enlil taught the kings the science of irrigation. Imagine the thousands of workers, guided by the divine blueprints, digging the great canals. You can hear the rhythmic thud of the wooden shovels and the splashing of the water as it is finally released into the channels. The water was led like a captive animal, directed through sluices and gates to the thirsty soil. The Garden of Edig was no longer a hidden sanctuary for the gods. It was being recreated across the entire Mesopotamian plain. Fields of golden barley and emerald wheat stretched as far as the eye could see. The date palms hung heavy with fruit. The land is a mirror of the sky, the priests taught. As the stars move in their ordered paths, so must the water move through the fields. Order is the breath of Enlil. This agricultural revolution gave humanity something they had never truly had: time, with the silos full and the harvests predictable. The humans did not have to spend every waking hour searching for food. They could think. They could create. They could look at the stars and wonder as the cities grew. Lagash, Nippur, Yor, and Eridu, social structure became more complex. The Anunnaki realized that for humanity to remain stable, they needed more than just food and writing. They needed law. The divine decrees, were translated into codes of conduct. These were not just rules for the market, they were reflections of the cosmic balance. The king is the shadow of the god, the decree stated. His word is the law, but his law must be just. If he oppresses the widow or the orphan, the gods will withdraw their favor, and the city will fall. Imagine the king of your standing before the great ziggurat of the moon god Nana. He is dressed in robes of fine wool and gold. He carries a staff that has been passed down through the generations, said to have been carved from a branch of the tree of life. He is the mediator. The humans looked to the king for justice, and the king looked to the ziggurat for guidance. This was the era of theocratic order. The gods were no longer the direct slave masters. They were the distant fathers, the overseers of a system that allowed humans to govern themselves within a framework of divine principle. The ziggurats were the heart of every Sumerian city. They were massive, stepped pyramids that served as the bond between heaven and earth. To the humans who lived in the shadow of these structures, the ziggurat was a literal mountain of the gods. At the very top was a small, beautifully decorated chamber, the bedchamber of the deity. It was believed that during the high holy days, the god would descend from the stars and rest in this room, communing with the king and the high priestess. The air around the ziggurats was always filled with the scent of burning cedar and the sound of chanting. The priests were the scientists of their day. They spent the nights on the high platforms, tracking the movements of the planets, the wandering stars that they knew were the homes of the Anunnaki. They developed the sexagesimal system, the basic mathematics we still use today to measure our time and our circles. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This was the math of the gods, a gift from Enki to help humanity understand the architecture of the universe. As you lie there, think of the clock ticking on your wall or the watch on your wrist. That rhythm, that division of time, is a direct inheritance from the temples of Sumer. It is a pulse that began 5,000 years ago, a gift from the shining ones to the black-headed ones. Now, let the story slow down, like the flow of a river as it reaches the sea. As the centuries of the second time passed, the physical presence of the Anunnaki began to fade. They were no longer walking the streets of Eridu or appearing in the markets of Uruk. They were retreating. Not the darkness of a storm, nor the sudden shadow of an eclipse, but the slow, inevitable twilight of an era that lasted for nearly 500,000 years. The air of Mesopotamia, once electric with the presence of the Shining Ones, is beginning to settle. The hum of the ziggurats, those massive resonators that once buzzed with the frequency of the stars, is fading into a low, ghostly vibration as you settle into your rest. Imagine you are standing on the highest terrace of the ziggurat in Yor. The year is no longer a year of the gods, but a year of men measured in the short, rapid cycles of the seasons. Below you, the city is still alive with the flickers of oil lamps and the distant, rhythmic chanting of the priests. But there is a hollow quality to the sound now. It is the sound of a people calling out to a father who has already turned his back to the door. This is the story of the long withdrawal. It is the story of how the Anunnakathos, who from heaven to earth came, decided that their work was finished, and how they slowly, piece by piece, dismantled the bridge between the worlds. It is a story of forgotten knowledge, abandoned cities, and the melancholy grace of a civilization fading into myth for thousands of years after the Great Flood. The Anunnaki had acted as the shepherds of humanity. They had lowered the kingship from the heavens. They had taught the arts of the stylus, the plough, and the star map. But even an immortal can feel the weight of time. The Earth is a world of high gravity and rapid biological turnover. To the Anunnaki, whose heartbeats were synchronized with the 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru, the Earth felt like a frantic, fast-moving dream. They watched human generations rise and fall like the leaves of a single season. They saw the cities they had built with eternal stone being slowly reclaimed by the desert. Silt and the river's mud. Enlil, the Lord of the Command, was the first to feel the pull of the stars. He had always been a creature of the heights, a being of the cold, clean air. The clamor of humanity, though now organized into civilizations, still grated on his ancient nerves. He looked at the Earth and saw a world that had become too crowded, too complex, and too far removed from the pristine silence of the first time. The mission is complete, Enlil declared in the final assembly of the gods. The gold has been harvested. The atmosphere of Nibiru is healed. The primitive worker has become a man, and the man has become a king. Our presence here is no longer a necessity. It has become a tether. It is time for the sons of Anu to return to the house of the sky. The withdrawal was not a sudden flight. It was a gradual fading, a tactical retreat into the shadows. It began in the temples. For centuries, the gods had physically inhabited the high chambers of the zig. A king could walk up the stairs, and, if his heart was pure and his me was correct, he could look upon the face of his creator. But slowly, the doors to those chambers remained closed. The bread of life and the water of life that the priests offered remained untouched. Imagine the desperation of the high priests in the city of Uruk. They would burn the finest cedar. They would play the most melodic harps. They would chant the secret names of Inanna until their voices cracked. But the inner sanctum remained cold. The goddess, once so passionate and present, was now only a presence felt in the wind, or a flicker in the movement of the planet Venus. The gods were shifting their consciousness. They were retreating from the physical 3D reality of the Earth into the higher frequencies of their own nature. They were becoming spirit to the humans, even though, to themselves, they were simply preparing for the long voyage home. This created a profound psychological shift in humanity. This was the birth of religion. When the gods were present, there was no need for faith. There was only the fact of their existence. But as they withdrew, the fact became a memory, and the memory became a hope. The humans began to build larger and more elaborate temples, not to house a resident god, but to lure a departing one back. One of the most melancholic aspects of the withdrawal was the systematic hiding of the tablets of destiny, and the divine blueprints of technology. Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, could not bear to see his secret knowledge misused by the growing ambitions of human kings. He knew that, without the steady hand of the Anunnaki to guide them, the secrets of genetic manipulation, anti-gravity, and the firestones would lead to the destruction of the very world he had saved from the flood. "We must seal the Abzu," Enki whispered to his daughter, the goddess of writing. "We must bury the tablets in the foundations of the earth, in places where only those with the mind of the stars can find them. The humans are not yet ready to be the masters of the elements. They must learn to walk before they can fly." Imagine Enki walking for the last time through his laboratories in Eridu. He touches the crystalline walls, and with a word of power, he deactivates the resonance. The lights flicker and die. the machines that could heal any sickness or track the movement of distant galaxies are encased in a temporal field, a bubble of time, where they will remain frozen until the world is ready to receive them again. He buried the most sacred knowledge in the place of the two mountains, and deep beneath the sands of the Giza Plateau. He left clues in the geometry of the monuments and the mathematics of the star charts, a breadcrumb trail for a future humanity to follow. Before they left, the Anunnaki made one final attempt to ensure the stability of the Earth. They created the era of the demigods, offspring of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. These were beings like Gilgamesh, men of immense stature and wisdom who carried a higher percentage of Anunnaki DNA. They were the anchors, the ones meant to bridge the gap as the full-blooded gods withdrew. They were given the long life, though not the immortality of their fathers. This was a time of great sadness. The demigods felt like exiles in their own skin. They had the memories of the stars, but the bodies of the earth. They looked at the retreating ships of their fathers and felt a sense of profound abandonment. Gilgamesh's search for immortality was, in truth, a search for the departing Anunnaki. He was a son trying to chase a father who had already boarded the ship. When he finally found Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, he found not a god, but a weary old man living on the edge of the world, waiting for his own crossing. The lesson Gilgamesh learned is the lesson the Anunnaki left for all of us. When the gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. The physical departure of the Anunnaki occurred in stages, synchronized with the cycles of the planets. The most significant exit happened when Nibiru made its closest approach, its gravitational pull providing the slingshot required for the massive gems to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Imagine a night in the ancient Near East, 4,000 years ago. The sky is clear, and the stars are brilliant. Suddenly, from the high desert plateaus of the Sinai and the plains of Mesopotamia, pillars of white-blue fire begin to rise. These were not the chaotic explosions of modern rockets. They were silent, elegant ascents, the winged discs, the great circular ships of the gods lifted into the air, their hulls glowing with a soft, iridescent light. They hovered for a moment, like a cluster of new stars, casting a long, ghostly shadow over the ziggurats. The humans watched from the rooftops. They watched in a silence that was heavy with the realization of loss. The shining ones were leaving. The era of the presence was ending. The ships ascended higher and higher, becoming tiny specks of light before vanishing into the velvet blackness of the space between the worlds. In that moment, the earth felt smaller. The air felt thinner. The magic, the literal, technological magic of the gods was gone. Enki was said to be the last to leave. Some legends say he did not leave at all, but that he descended into the Abzu, choosing to remain in a state of deep meditative hibernation within the core of the planet, watching over his creation from the inside. But to the eyes of the world, he was gone. As the gods left, the cities they had personally governed began to decline, without the divine presence to maintain the resonance. The very stones of the cities seemed to lose their vitality. Eridu, the first city, the home in the faraway, was the first to be reclaimed by the desert. The great irrigation canals that Enki had engineered began to silt up. The gardens withered. The white marble of the palaces cracked under the unrelenting heat of the sun. Imagine the wind whistling through the empty hallways of Enki's palace. The Mi tablets are gone. The golden statues have been melted down by later, more primitive kings. The crystalline floors are covered in a thick layer of reddish dust. The humans who remained in these cities felt like ghosts living in a tomb. They tried to keep the old rituals alive, but the heart was gone. They eventually moved away, seeking the newer cities of Babylon and Assyria's cities built by men. For men, where the gods were only statues of wood and gold, not living beings of light and power, the great spaceport in the Sinai was sanitized, destroyed by the Anunnaki themselves before they left, so that no human could ever use the stairway to heaven for their own ambitions. The fires of the first cities have long since turned to ash, and the rivers of Mesopotamia have shifted their beds many times over, burying the white marble of Eridu and the golden towers of Nippur beneath layers of forgotten silt. The world has grown old, and the voices that once commanded the tides and the winds have retreated into the great velvet silence of the cosmos. But as you lie here in the quiet embrace of the night, you must realize that the story is not over. It has simply changed its form, flowing like a hidden spring beneath the surface of everything we see, everything we touch, and everything we dream. The Anunnaki may have withdrawn their physical presence, their shems ascending into the violet twilight of the final crossing, but they did not leave us empty-handed. They left behind a world that is fundamentally shaped by their touch, a world that is, in many ways, a living monument to their stay. Look out across the vast landscapes of our Earth, to the places where the desert sands blow against the jagged bones of the mountains. There, in the silent, sun-bleached corners of the world, stand the sentinels. They are the stones that shouldn't be. Imagine the great terrace of Baalbek, where blocks of stone weighing nearly 1,000 tons are fitted together, so tightly that not even a strand of a woman's hair can pass between them. To the eyes of the modern wanderer, they are a mystery of engineering, but in the memory of the ancient storytellers, they were the landing places, the foundations for the celestial chariots that required a base as solid as the Earth's own core. And consider the great triangles of stone that rise from the sands of the west. We call them pyramids, but to the heirs of the Anunnaki, they were the Ikor, the houses of the mountain. They were built with a geometry that reflects the stars, a mathematics of the heavens brought down to the mud of the Nile. They are not merely tombs, they are resonators, silent machines that once tuned the earth to the frequency of the stars. These ruins are the fingerprints of the gods. They have been weathered by the wind and scarred by the greed of later kings, but they remain. They stand as a testament to a time when humanity was not yet ready to walk alone, and the giants of Nibiru provided the blueprints for the impossible. They are the physical echoes of a wisdom that we are only just beginning to remember. But the legacy of the Anunnaki is not just found in the stone. It is found in the way we perceive reality itself. Have you ever wondered why we measure our hours in 60 minutes and our minutes in 60 seconds? Have you ever wondered why the circle of the world is divided into 360 degrees? This is not a random occurrence of nature. This is the sexagesimal system, the math of the gods, gifted to the Sumerians in the shadow of the ziggurats. It is a math that reflects the structure of the solar system, a rhythm that pulsates in the movement of the planets and the ticking of our own hearts. Every time you check the time, every time you look at a compass, you are speaking the language of Enki. You are participating in a divine order that was established before the mountains were formed. This is the me, the divine decrees of civilization. The Anunnaki taught us that the universe is not a chaotic accident, but a structured masterpiece. They gave us the laws of agriculture, the art of writing, and the science of the stars. so that we might one day stand on our own feet. They gave us the tools to measure the world so that we would not be afraid of its vastness. When you look at a field of golden grain, you are looking at a descendant of the seeds first cultivated in the house of Shimti. When you see a city rising from the plains, you are seeing the shadow of Eridu. We are living in a house that was built for us by those who came from above. And though we have changed the furniture and painted the walls, the foundations remain theirs. Now turn your gaze inward. This is the most profound legacy of all. The ancient tablets tell us that we are made of the blood of a god mixed with the clay of the earth. This is the great paradox of the human condition. We are creatures of the mud, subject to the laws of hunger, pain, and the short cycle of the seasons. Our bodies are heavy, bound by the gravity of the world that birthed us. But inside that clay, there is a flickering flame. There is a knowing that does not belong to the earth. Have you ever looked at the night sky and felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of homesickness? Have you ever felt that you are a stranger in your own skin, a traveler passing through a land that is beautiful but not quite home? That is the T-Mother divine memory. It is the legacy of the Anunnaki blood that flows in your veins. We are the only creatures on this planet who look up. We are the only ones who ask why. We are the only ones who try to capture the music of the stars in the vibration of a string or the stroke of a brush. This restlessness, this divine discontent, is the gift of Enki. It is the spark that he secretly wove into our nature, so that we would never be satisfied with being mere primitive workers. We are a bridge between two worlds. We carry the history of Nibiru in our soul and the history of Earth in our bones. This is why we are capable of both terrible destruction and breathtaking creation. We are the children of a conflict between the stern order of Enlil and the compassionate curiosity of Enki. We are a mystery that even the gods did not fully understand as the night deepens. Let us speak of the promise. The Anunnaki did not leave us forever. They are travelers of the Great Ellipse, the long, lonely path that takes them far beyond the reach of our sun. But the universe is a circle, and what goes away must eventually return. The crossing is not just a myth of the past. It is a prophecy of the future. The ancient seers, who watched the stars from the summits of the ziggurats, knew that the heavens operate on a clock that dwarfs our understanding. They spoke of a time when the stars of the fish would fade, and the stars of the water-bearer would rise, a time when the great cycle would complete its rotation. They believed that as the cycle nears its end, the veil between the worlds will thin once more. The knowledge that was hidden in the earth, the lost me tablets, the secrets of the stones, the truth of our own blood will begin to resurface. We will begin to hear the whispers of the wall again, just as Zeusudra did in the House of Reeds. We see this happening today, though we do not always use the ancient names. We feel a collective awakening, a pull toward the mysteries of our origin. We are building our own Shems to explore the void. We are deciphering the me of our own biology. We are becoming the very beings we once worshipped. The crossing is not a catastrophe to be feared, but a reunion to be anticipated. It is the moment when the creators return to see what their creation has become. It is the time when the black-headed ones will finally understand their place in the cosmic family. The story is coming to its rest now. The torches in the temple of Enki have flickered out, and the last of the Sumerian priests has laid down his stylus. The gods have retreated into the deep mists of time, and the earth has been left in our hands. Listen to the rhythm of your own breathing. In and out. In and out. This is the same rhythm that was first given to Adamu in the house of Shimti. It is the pulse of the earth and the heartbeat of the stars. You are a part of a lineage that is millions of years old. You are the survivor of the Great Flood and the heir to the golden wisdom of the Zig. You are a masterpiece of genetic alchemy, a soul of fire encased in a body of red clay. The Anunnaki are not gone. They are watching from the heights where the air is thin and the stars are bright. They are waiting in the depths of the Abzu, where the fresh waters flow and the ancient memories are kept. But most of all, they are here, in the quiet spaces of your own mind. In the dreams that visit you when the world is still, the silence of the night is a warm, protective blanket. Let it wrap around you now. Let the weight of the eons pull you down into a deep, dreamless sleep. There is nothing to fear in the dark, for the dark is where the story began, and the dark is where the stars shine brightest. The crossing is far off, but the memory is near. The me is safe in your heart. The gods are at peace, and the world is at rest. Close your eyes and imagine the violet sky of Nibiru. Imagine the golden dust of the shield, shimmering like a veil of light. Imagine the hand of Enki resting gently on your shoulder, guiding you home. The story is finished for tonight, but the legacy continues in every breath you take, in every dream you have, and in every tomorrow that rises over the